Imagine standing at a bustling train station, unaware that in a matter of seconds, an unstoppable force would tear through the platform, leaving destruction and haunting images behind. Today, we explore some of the most shocking train disasters in history. From a locomotive suspended precariously above the streets of Dublin to the horrifying impact of Iowa's deadliest train crash, where even children couldn't escape the chaos. And what happens when a simple missed signal leads to one of the most tragic collisions during World War II? Stay with us as we uncover these catastrophic events and the fateful errors that forever changed the world of rail travel. The image depicts the twisted remains of a Brooklyn rapid transit train, derailed inside a tunnel, its windows shattered and metal frames contorted by the violent crash. Debris scatters the tracks as the wooden structure of the train cars leans at dangerous angles, a haunting reminder of the devastation that unfolded. The Malbone Street wreck occurred on November 1, 1918, in Brooklyn, New York. A train speeding through a dangerous curve that over 5 times the speed limit derailed, slamming into the concrete walls of the tunnel. The motorman, Edward Luciano, was untrained and had only 2 hours of experience operating passenger trains. Additionally, the train was improperly configured, contributing to the disaster. The motorman failed to apply the emergency brakes as the train entered the sharp curve at speeds between 30 and 40 miles per hour instead of the mandated 6 miles per hour. The crash left 102 people dead and over 250 injured. Many passengers were tragically impaled or crushed in the splintered wreckage of the wooden cars. Ebbets Field, then home to the Brooklyn Dodgers, was converted into an emergency hospital to treat the wounded. Despite multiple trials, no one was ultimately held accountable for the disaster, a decision that sparked outrage among the victims' families and the public. Just a few years later, another deadly curve would claim even more lives, this time in Nashville. Brace yourself for the aftermath of a wreckage that still haunts Tennessee today. On July 9, 1918, 2 passenger trains barreled towards each other in what would become the deadliest train collision in U.S. history. Dutchman's Curve, a sharp turn outside of Nashville, became the stage for this catastrophe due to a deadly mix of human error and miscommunication. An express train and a local train were both routed towards the same section of single track, unaware of the impending disaster. The express train, traveling at full speed, collided head-on with the local, resulting in a devastating crash that sent wood, metal, and debris flying. Over 100 people were killed, and 170 more were injured, many of them crushed in the wooden cars. In the image, the wreckage sprawls across the tracks, with train cars crumpled into unrecognizable shapes. Hundreds of onlookers surround the scene, emphasizing the sheer scale of the disaster. Rescue workers fought through the twisted steel and debris to pull out survivors, but the damage was so catastrophic that many victims were beyond help. This horrific crash would go down in history, but another train disaster in the heart of Paris would prove just as shocking, where a locomotive seemed to defy gravity itself. A scene of impossible chaos unfolded at Montparnasse Station in Paris on October 22, 1895. In a moment of malfunction and human error, a passenger train failed to stop at the station. The train's brakes failed, and as the driver attempted to make up for lost time, the locomotive barreled through the station's buffers and smashed through a 2-foot-thick wall. The train's front end plunged over 30 feet down onto the street below, leaving bystanders in shock. In the image, the locomotive hangs precariously from the broken station wall, its massive frame tilted vertically as if frozen mid-crash. Debris litters the scene, while the elegant architecture of the station stands in contrast to the destruction below. There was one casualty, a woman walking on the street below who was struck by falling debris. The engineer, fined for his recklessness, survived, and the locomotive was eventually repaired and put back into service. But this dramatic accident wouldn't be the last. Halfway across the world, a storm, a bridge, and an overcrowded train would conspire to create another nightmare. This time, the waters below would swallow hundreds of lives. The image shows train cars sprawled down a steep embankment, half submerged in water, with a crowd of spectators lining the shore. The cars lie in twisted wreckage along the banks of the Bagmati River, a scene of devastating loss. This disaster struck on June 6, 1981, during India's harsh monsoon season. A packed nine-car train carrying nearly 1,000 passengers was making its way across a bridge in Bihar when tragedy struck. The train derailed and 7 cars plunged into the swollen river below. The cause of the derailment remains a point of speculation. Some claim the engineer braked suddenly to avoid hitting a cow, while others suggest high winds blew the cars off the bridge. Whatever the reason, the outcome was devastating. An estimated 600 people lost their lives, many swept away by the river's powerful currents before rescue efforts could reach them. The remoteness of the accident site meant help arrived too late for most. The sheer scale of the tragedy, along with the brutal conditions, made this one of the deadliest train accidents in history. The Bihar disaster was a devastating tragedy, but what happens when the chaos of war collides with human error? The result is a catastrophe just as horrifying, where flames and destruction claimed hundreds of lives. In January 1917, as World War I raged on, Romania witnessed one of the deadliest train disasters in history. The Cirei rail disaster unfolded when a train packed with over 1,000 civilians and soldiers, desperate to escape advancing German forces, became a runaway. Descending a steep grade near the Cirei station, the train's brakes failed. Despite desperate attempts to slow it down, the overcrowded train derailed, and 24 of the 26 cars were thrown from the tracks. The ensuing wreck was a fiery disaster, with many of the passengers trapped inside burning carriages. The image shows the aftermath. Train cars scattered along the tracks, some overturned and others crushed by the impact. Rescue workers and soldiers sift through the wreckage in a foggy haze, trying to recover bodies and help the few survivors. The exact death toll is still debated, but estimates suggest more than 700 lives were lost in the crash, making it one of the most catastrophic train wrecks of the 20th century. But the devastation of the Maureen derailment wasn't the last. Just months later, in the Netherlands, rain-soaked tracks would lead to yet another deadly crash, one that would forever change Dutch railway history. The image shows a pile of charred debris, the aftermath of the Maureen derailment, one of the most devastating train accidents in history. Soldiers stand beside the wreckage, surveying the mangled steel that once formed the train's carriages. Twisted metal and wooden fragments are barely recognizable, a haunting reflection of the disaster that unfolded on December 12, 1917. This tragedy struck during World War I, when a train carrying over 1,000 French soldiers from Italy to France derailed in the Maureen Valley. The brakes failed as the train descended a steep incline, causing it to reach deadly speeds of over 80 miles per hour. The overloaded wooden train cars crashed into one another, sparking a massive fire fueled by the soldiers' explosives and the candles used for lighting. The geography of the area acted like a furnace, with the mountain walls trapping the heat. Official reports recorded 700 to 800 deaths, but the true number may have been as high as 1,000, as many bodies were burned beyond recognition. The scale of the disaster was so great that the military classified it for years. But this wasn't the only time World War I would bring such devastation to the rails. A few months later, another deadly derailment would shake the Netherlands, where rain-soaked tracks awaited a disastrous outcome. The aftermath of the Weesp train disaster is vividly captured in this image. Train cars lie twisted and shattered along the tracks, surrounded by rescuers picking through the wreckage. The chaos of the derailment is evident, the wooden carriages splintered from the impact. What began as a routine trip from Amersfoort to Amsterdam on September 13, 1918, ended in catastrophe. As the train approached the bridge over the Merwede Canal, a section of the railway embankment, weakened by heavy rain, collapsed. The locomotive, along with several wooden carriages, plunged off the tracks, leading to a devastating crash. 41 people lost their lives that day, and 42 more were injured in the worst railway disaster in Dutch history at the time. The cause was found to be a combination of poor track maintenance and heavy rainfall, which had destabilized the embankment. Rescue efforts were swift, with surgeons, nuns, and soldiers rushing to the scene, but for many passengers, it was too late. As the tragedy of Weesp unfolded, Europe's railways would soon face another horrifying event, one where an invisible killer lurked inside a tunnel in southern Italy. The image shows a row of lifeless bodies laid out on a station platform, a chilling reminder of the Bolzano train disaster of 1944. The victims, poisoned by carbon monoxide, lay motionless, their faces hidden from view. This eerie silence contrasts with the disaster that occurred in a mountain tunnel in southern Italy. On March 2, 1944, a steam-powered train, overloaded with passengers, stalled inside the Army Tunnel while traveling from Naples to Potenza. Due to poor quality coal and a lack of ventilation, carbon monoxide from the locomotive's engines filled the tunnel. As the fumes spread, passengers unknowingly inhaled the deadly gas, with most succumbing in their sleep. By the time anyone realized the danger, it was too late. Over 500 people had died in what would become one of the deadliest train disasters in Italian history. While this silent disaster claimed lives without warning, a different kind of terror awaited the passengers of a Spanish train later that same year, where fire and collision would conspire to bring destruction. In this image, a mountain tunnel becomes the site of utter devastation. Mangled train cars, their metal frames twisted from impact, lie scattered across the tracks. The Torre del Bierzo rail disaster of January 3, 1944 remains one of Spain's worst train accidents, claiming the lives of over 500 passengers. The disaster unfolded inside a tunnel near the village of Torre del Bierzo when a mail train, suffering from brake failure, collided with a shunting engine that had been mistakenly left on the track. A third train, a coal-laden freight, crashed into the wreckage moments later. The resulting fire engulfed the carriages, consuming everything in its path. Signal cables were destroyed, and the fire prevented any timely rescue. While the wreckage burned within the tunnel, the sheer scope of the disaster was hidden for days, with the true death toll only revealed later as workers sifted through the wreckage. While the Torre del Bierzo disaster was a horrific example of human error and mechanical failure, nature itself can be just as unforgiving. So what happens when a force of nature itself becomes the cause of devastation? The image shows the tragic aftermath of the deadliest avalanche in U.S. history, with train cars buried under snow and debris scattered across a mountainous landscape. Trees are splintered and metal is twisted, the force of nature evident in the sheer destruction. On March 1, 1910, two Great Northern trains, one a passenger train and the other a mail train, were stuck near the town of Wellington, Washington. After days of relentless snowstorms, a sudden rainstorm triggered a massive avalanche that swept both trains off the tracks and down into the Ty River Gorge. The avalanche killed 96 people, making it the deadliest in U.S. history. Rescue efforts were hampered by the remote location and harsh weather conditions, with bodies buried under the snow for months. In response, the railway company built protective snow sheds and a new tunnel to prevent further disasters. But as nature brought down the mountainside in Washington and Spain, structural failures were preparing for an equally devastating event. This illustration captures a scene of total collapse, with train carriages dangling off the ruined Alcudia Bridge. Soldiers and civilians desperately sift through the debris, fighting to pull survivors from the wreckage. On April 27, 1884, a train carrying over 100 soldiers of the Castilla and Granada infantry regiments derailed and plunged into the Alcudia River after one of the bridge's pillars gave way due to heavy rains. The official death toll reached 59, with another 56 soldiers critically injured. Speculation about sabotage arose after investigators discovered the damaged bridge pillar, but no conclusive evidence was found. Despite the questions surrounding its cause, this disaster shocked Spain. The damage to the bridge had seemed inevitable with no prior warnings, like the next looming crash in Dublin, where the unexpected unfolded in a city's heart. In the photograph, a freight locomotive precariously hangs over the edge of a shattered station wall, having plowed straight through it. Onlookers gather below, stunned at the near catastrophe. On February 20, 1900, a freight train overran the buffer stops at Harcourt Street Station in Dublin, Ireland. Despite the dramatic crash, the accident remarkably resulted in no fatalities. The locomotive Wicklow crashed through the station's end wall and hung over Hatch Street below, coming to a stop just before it would have fallen. The driver misjudged the distance and failed to stop, and though damage was significant, the incident became infamous due to the striking image of the train hanging above the street. The crash at Harcourt Street might have been a spectacle, but no one was prepared for the sheer devastation that awaited in Green Mountain. In this image, the scene is one of total devastation. Wooden train cars lie shattered and splintered, with debris scattered across the tracks. Rescuers are seen climbing into the wreckage, attempting to pull survivors from the carnage. It is a sobering glimpse of the worst train disaster in Iowa's history. On March 21, 1910, the Green Mountain wreck occurred near Spring Creek Township, Iowa. Two trains, the number 21 Louis Twin Cities and the number 19 Chicago Twin Cities, had been combined into one due to a previous wreck. With two locomotives leading the way, the train was composed of a mix of wooden and steel cars. Unfortunately, as the train approached Green Mountain, the leading engine derailed, crashing into a clay embankment. The steel Pullman cars sliced through the wooden carriages sandwiched between them, instantly killing 52 passengers, many of whom were children. Those in the steel cars survived unharmed. The disaster shocked the nation and led to the introduction of improved safety protocols for wooden train cars, though no official cause was ever released. The Green Mountain wreck shows how disaster can strike in an instant, but in wartime Germany, a single missed signal would set the stage for a deadly collision that left the country reeling. In this haunting image, two trains lie crumpled on the tracks, their carriages telescoped together after a violent collision. Rescuers comb through the twisted wreckage in the freezing cold, trying to save those who can still be helped, while hundreds of others have already perished in the accident. The Ginthen rail disaster took place on December 22, 1939, in the early morning hours near Ginthen, Germany. The disaster occurred when an express train, D180, crashed into the back of another stationary express train, T10, that had stopped just minutes earlier. Due to wartime equipment shortages, D180 lacked the Inducy train protection system, and its driver misread a signal at Balik, failing to stop in time. At an estimated speed of 62 miles per hour, the collision devastated the rear carriages of D10, killing an estimated 278 people and injuring hundreds more. The cold night, paired with a wartime blackout, hindered the rescue efforts, with many injured passengers freezing to death. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, take a look at this other video right here, and don't forget to subscribe.